Famous people who passed away in 1732. Before we proceed, please subscribe to our channel to support us. William Hiseland. He was born in August 1620 and he died in February 1732. His age was 111 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. William was a celebrated English soldier, reputed for his remarkable longevity and participation in key historical battles over a century-long career. In 1709, at the purported age of 89, he fought at the Battle of Malplaquet and was believed to be the oldest soldier on the field. He claimed to become the last survivor of the English Civil Wars, which he said he had served from 1642 to 1651. Hiseland attained the rank of sergeant in extreme old age. He became a Chelsea pensioner, although he had to give up his place as an inn pensioner. When he married at the claimed age of 103, he was buried at the Royal Hospital, Chelsea. Aimed at the War of the Spanish Succession, Hiseland was one of the seasoned campaigners the Duke of Marlborough took into the Flanders in June 1709. At the Battle of Malplaquet on 11 September 1709, Hiseland served with the Royal Scots, and the regiment claimed the distinction of having both the oldest and the youngest men on field. As a private, McBain carried his 3-week-old son throughout the battle in a knapsack. Anne Scott, 1st Duchess of Buccleuch. She was born in February 1651 and she died in February 1732. Her age was 80 at the time of her death, and the reason for her death was undisclosed. Anne was a prominent Scottish noblewoman remembered for her vast estates, political influence, and complex relationship with King Charles II after her father died when she was a few months old and her sisters by the time she was 10. She inherited the family's titles. She was married to James Scott, 1st Duke of Monmouth, and the couple had 6 children, only 2 of whom survived past infancy. Her husband was executed after losing the Monmouth rebellion, and she went to marry again. Upon her marriage in 1663, her husband took her surname and the titles of Duke of Monmouth, Lord Scott of Winchester and Axdale, Earl of Daclith, and Duke of Buccleuch were created, with remainder to the heirs male of his body by Anne, failing whom to the heirs whomsoever of her body, who shall succeed to the estates and earldom of Buccleuch. Francis Atterbury. He was born in March 1663 and he died in February 1732. His age was 68 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. Francis was an English bishop and Jacobite sympathizer whose political activities and compelling writings left a controversial yet notable mark on his time. He gained patronage under Queen Anne, but was mistrusted by Hanoverian Whig ministers and banished for communicating with the Old Pretender in the Atterbury plot. He was a noted wit and a gifted preacher. After the Glorious Revolution, Atterbury readily swore fealty to the new government. He had taken holy orders in 1687, preached occasionally in London with an eloquence which raised his reputation, and was soon appointed one of the royal chaplains. He ordinarily lived at Oxford, where he was the chief advisor and assistant to Henry Aldrich, under whom Christ Church was a stronghold of Troyism. Thomas Boston. He was born in March 1676 and he died in May 1732. His age was 56 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. Thomas Boston was a Scottish theologian and preacher who whose influential writings shaped Reformed theology and spiritual life in 18th century Scotland. Boston was successively schoolmaster at Glencairn and minister of Simperin in Berwickshire and Atterbury in Salcashire. In addition to his best-known work, Human Nature, in its fourfold state, one of the religious classics of Scotland, he wrote an original little book, The Crook in the Lot, and a learned treatise on the Hebrew poets. He also took a leading part in the codes of the church in what was known as the Marrow controversy. Regarding the merits of an English work, The Marrow of the Modern Divinity, which he defended against the attacks of moderate party in church, Boston was unduly introspective, was a man of singular piety and amiability. Thomas Parker, 1st Earl of Macclesfield. He was born in July 1666 and he died in April 1732. His age was 65 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. Thomas was an English lawyer and politician whose tenure as Lord Chancellor was marked by significant reforms and controversy, including his eventual impeachment for corruption. His career ended when he was convicted of corruption on a massive scale, and he spent the later years of his life in retirement at his home, Sherborne Castle in Oxfordshire. Parker was returned as a Whig Member of Parliament for Derby at the 1705 English general election and was appointed QC and Sergeant at Law and knighted on 9th July 1705. He was returned unopposed for Derby at the 1708 British general election. Like other Whig, he voted for the general naturalization of foreign Protestants in 1709. Being one of the leading Whig lawyers in the House of Commons, he was deeply involved in the moves to impeach Dr. Sacheverell. He was appointed to the committee to draw up the articles of impeachment on 14th December 1709. John Horsley. He was born in 1685 and he died in January 1732. His age was 47 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was apoplexy. John Horsley was an English clergyman and antiquary whose scholarly works shed light on the Roman influence in Britain, leaving a lasting legacy in historical studies. Horsley communicated to the Philosophical Transactions notes on the rainfall at Witherington in the years 1722 and 1723. It is as an archaeologist and antiquarian that Horsley is now known. His major work, Britannia Romana, or the Roman Antiquities of Britain, was published in 1732. One of Horsley's achievements in this book was to identify for the first time which legions of the Roman army were stationed in Britain. There was, in the British Museum, a copy with notes by John Watt. He also published 2 sermons and a handbook to his lectures on mechanics, etc., and projected a history of Northumberland and Durham, collections of which were found among his papers. Charles-René Dozier. He was born in February 1640 and he died in February 1732. His age was 92 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a French heraldic expert who greatly contributed to the systemization of French nobility and heraldic records through his meticulous publications. In addition to his commentary appended to Antoine Varia's History of King Charles IX, he published Recherches sur la noblesse de Champagne in 1673, on the promulgation in 1696 of an edict directing all who had armorial bearings to register them on the payment of 20 livres. He was employed to collect the declarations returned in the various Généralités and established the Armorial Général de France. This work, which contained not only the armorial bearings of noble families but also of those commoners who were entitled to bear arms, is not complete, inasmuch as many refused to register their arms either from vanity or from a desire to evade the fee. The collection consists of 34 volumes of texts and 35 colored armorial bearings, and in spite of its deficiencies, is a useful store of information for the history of the old French families. Louis Marchand, he was born in February 1669 and he died in February 1732. His age was 63 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a French composer whose virtuosic organ and harpsichord works solidified his reputation as one of the leading musicians of his era. Born into an organist's family, he was a child prodigy and quickly established himself as one of the best-known French virtuosos of his time. He worked as organist of numerous churches and for a few years as one of the 4 organistes du roi. He had a violent temperament and an arrogant personality, and his life was filled with scandals publicized and widely discussed both during his lifetime and after his death. Despite his fame, few of his works survive to this day, and those that do, almost all date from his early years. Nevertheless, a few pieces of his, such as the organ pieces Grand Dialogue and Fond d'Orgue, have been lauded as classical works of the French organ school. Comparatively few works by him survive, most of them dating from the early stages of his career. The most numerous and arguably most important are his organ works. Richard Hancorne, he was born in December 1687 and he died in January 1732. His age was 44 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. Richard was a Welsh clergyman. Hancorne began his career at the Church of Llantwit Major with Lisworney. He was appointed as a reader on 20th November 1708 and a lecturer on 30th November 1715, which he retained until 7th May 1723. He was ordained as a deacon on 4th June 1710 and as a priest on 27th May 1711 by John Tyler, Bishop of Llandaff. He was a rector of Bury from 29th September 1716 and Sully from 24th July 1721. He held both until his death in 1732. He is commemorated for his restoration of the chancel of the Church of the Holy Trinity, Landau, during his incumbency in 1712. The event is recorded in Latin by a stone tablet on the exterior south wall of the chancel. Marie-Thérèse de Bourbon, she was born in February 1666 and she died in March 1732. Her age was 66 at the time of her death, and the reason for her death was syphilis. Marie was a French princess whose connections and position in the royal family made her a significant figure in the court of Louis XIV. It was planned for her to marry the Italian Emmanuel Philibert of Savoy, Prince de Carignan, but on 22nd January 1688, Marie married François Louis, Prince of Conti, Le Grand Conti, head of the Conti Cadet branch of the House of Bourbon, in the chapel of Versailles. The bride was passionately in love with her husband, but his attentions were elsewhere. It was well known at the court that he had an affair with his wife's sister-in-law, the Duchess of Bourbon. It was also said that he had homosexual tendencies and did not pay his wife much attention. Marie had a difficult relationship with her children and, as a result, lived quietly at the various county residencies, mainly at the Château de l'Isle-Adam. Giacomo Serpotta. He was born in March 1656 and he died in February 1732. His age was 75 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was an Italian sculptor celebrated for his innovative and expressive stucco decorations, particularly in the Baroque churches of Sicily. His skill and facility with stucco sculpture appears to have arisen without mentorship or direct exposures to the mainstream of Italian Baroque. Rudolf Whitcover describes him as an aberrancy in an otherwise provincial scene, a meteor in the Sicilian sky. In 1677, along with Procopio di Ferrari, he decorated the small church of the Madonna di Litria in Monreale. His first independent work appears to be in 1682 in connection with an equestrian statue of Charles II of Spain and Sicily, which was cast in bronze by Gaspare Romano. The Serpotta family, including his brother Giuseppe and his son Procopio, was immensely prolific in Palermo, decorating churches and oratories. In style, he has florid elegance that often recalls Antonio Raggi, a slightly older artist who was adept at stucco decoration and active in Rome. André Charles Boulle. He was born in November 1642 and he died in February 1732. His age was 89 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a French cabinet maker and artist whose luxurious and intricate furniture designs remain celebrated as masterpieces of decorative arts. He was the most remarkable of all French cabinet makers. Jean-Baptiste Colbert recommended him to Louis XIV of France, the Sun King, as the most skilled craftsman in his profession. Over the centuries, since his death, his name and that of his family has become associated with the art he perfected. The inlay of tortoise shell, brass, and pewter into ebony, it has become known as Boulle work, and the École Boulle, founded in 1886, a college of fine arts and crafts and applied arts in Paris, continues today to bear testimony to his enduring art, the art of inlay. In 1672, by the age of 30, Boulle was already being granted lodgings in the galleries of the Louvre, which Louis XIV had set apart for the use of the most favored among the artists employed by the crown. Louis de Sabran. He was born in March 1652 and he died in January 1732. His age was 79 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a French Jesuit theologian whose work in education and theology had a significant impact on Catholic thought and missionary efforts. In 1687, he was made the royal chaplain to James II. A sermon he preached to the king on August 28 of that year on the invocation of saints led to a pamphlet war with William G., at Pritcham. He also entered into controversy with William Sherlock, the Anglican theologian and Dean of St. Paul's. He was the assumed author of Dr. Sherlock, sifted from his bran and chaff in 1687, which Sherlock answered. He answered the reply with an answer to Dr. Sherlock's preservative, and then Dr. Sherlock's preservative considered in 1688. The same year, he was made the chaplain to the infant Prince of Wales. When the Glorious Revolution began, Sabran was responsible for getting the prince out of the country. Johann Ernst Hanxleden. He was born in May 1681 and he died in March 1732. His age was 50 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. Johann was a German Jesuit priest and missionary, best known for his contributions as a Malayalam and Sanskrit poet, grammarian, lexicographer, and philologist. He lived in India for most of his life and became a scholar of Sanskrit and Malayalam languages before authoring Puthanpala, a poem on the life of Jesus Christ. Malayalam Portuguese Dictionary, the first dictionary in Malayalam, as well as 2 linguistic treatises. He also established the Zion Gaudi Church, which is a church under St. Francis Xavier Florence Church, Vellore. He is also very prominent in Padua. Count Palatine Francis Louis of Neuburg. He was born in July 1664 and he died in April 1732. His age was 67 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a German nobleman and ecclesiastical leader who played a significant role in the Catholic Church and politics of the Holy Roman Empire. In 1683, he became Prince Bishop of Breslau after the death of his brother Wolfgang Georg, who should have held this office. In 1694, he assumed the additional offices of Hochmeister of the Teutonic Order and Prince Bishop of Worms. In 1716, he became Archbishop Elector of Trier. During his rule in Trier, he recognized the jurisdiction in the diocese and advanced the renovation of the Roman Moselle Bridge and the cathedral. He became Archbishop Elector of Mainz in 1729, giving up the position in Trier. As the Pope, he had prohibited a merging of the 2 archbishoprics. In Mainz, Franz Ludwig also started some administrative and judicial reforms, as well as the construction of the Deutschhaus. In Worms, he started the reconstruction of the Bischofshof Palace, which was destroyed in 1689. Balthasar Permoser. He was born in August 1651 and he died in February 1732. His age was 80 at the time of his death, and the reason for his death was undisclosed. He was a prominent German sculptor whose dynamic and expressive Baroque works, particularly in Dresden, are considered some of the finest examples of the style. In 1697, on the way to Italy once more, he remained almost a year in his old haunts, during which he sculpted the Atlantis of the west doorway of the Hofstallung in Salzburg. In 1710, he returned to Dresden to collaborate with the architect Matthias Daniel Popelmann on the Zwinger Palace, built in 1710 to 1728 for Augustus the Strong, Elector of Saxony, where he provided full-blown Roman Baroque sculptural details. For the wall pavilion, he provided 6 of the 12 festive, flexing, grimacing Atlantis, for which he is most remembered. Thanks for watching the video. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Have a nice day.